years. Also, at the same point, Egypt had experienced its most devastating loss military-wise it had in that entire dynasty. So all the way from Thutmose the First, Hatshepsut's dad, until now, this was the most extreme loss. So you would think that Akhenaten would sit here and say, hey, we need to kind of tone things down, get Egypt in a more stable position, and instead he just ramps it up. So we see his most extreme change yet. So Akhenaten was convinced that the god Aten was mad at him. So he had to do something extreme. So remember, Egypt is polytheistic, which means they believe in many, many gods. And remember all of those temples that his dad had built for the gods of all across Egypt. Well, Akhenaten decided Egypt was no longer going to be polytheistic. Rather, they were going to worship only one god, the Aten. So think about the huge cultural shift that would have had to happen and how extreme that would have been, that you have your whole life, this entire country has always believed in all these gods, and all of a sudden this extreme pharaoh comes in, and now you're only allowed to worship one god. As you'd imagine, people were not happy about it. He went and locked down all of the old temples, literally forcibly locked them. No one could even get in. He took all the money from the temples. He then even destroyed any evidence of the old gods. So their writings, their cartouches, their stories, their spells, everything like that were destroyed. Even the small gold statues of the gods, he had them melted down and destroyed. Yes, this was most definitely the breaking point for Egypt. And, interesting enough, shortly after this, Akhenaten dies. Now, I will give you a side note. Never is it written anywhere in Egyptian history that any of their pharaohs were assassinated or there were assassination attempts. It simply just didn't happen because they believed their pharaohs were gods. So you couldn't kill or you wouldn't kill your gods. However, suspiciously enough, Akhenaten dies. So, this is a great point now, too, for you to pause and take some notes on Akhenaten / Amenhotep the Fourth. All right, so now that you finished the notes on him, let's talk about who is left to rule. We know the throne must go to the eldest son. Well, up until this point, Akhenaten had only ever mentioned his daughters. In all the family depictions, it's only ever the daughters. We never hear anything of a son. The daughters are the ones he shares with Nefertiti too. So again, we're seeing Nefertiti kind of extending her power because she's putting her daughters in a very influential position. Her daughters are famous, okay? But now that Akhenaten's dead, we actually hear for the very first time the name Tutankhaten, okay? So we now know there is a son. And we estimate he is about the age of 6 at the time of his dad's death. So now the question is, who's going to rule? Tut or Nefertiti? So whoever gets to rule, excuse me, they have a huge problem. Egypt has completely turned against them. Egypt despises them. So they have to come up with a quick solution. So here are some of the solutions they come up with. They're going to change their names back. It's no longer Tutankhaten or referencing Aten at the end, okay? They're going to have names changed back to reflect the old gods. So, for example, Tutankhamen. So Amen, again, is an old god, and he is going to be referenced in Tut's name. So we're going to see this. Then they're going to reopen all of those temples that Akhenaten had shut. They're going to resupply the funding, so giving them back the money to keep going, having the ceremonies, the offerings, etc. They're going to return to the capital city of Memphis, and they're going to rebuild the wealth of Egypt. So I kind of mentioned this before, that Akhenaten this whole time was spending all of this money, yet he was bringing in no new money. He made no efforts to enhance their gold production, their material wealth, their trading. He basically was just spending. So Egypt was literally on the brink of being broke. Today we would call them almost bankrupt. So who's going to come in? Well, after the death of Akhenaten, we actually no longer see the name Neferu-Neferu-Aten Nefertiti. She's gone. So again, this is like the second time Nefertiti has disappeared, right? When Akhenaten changes all the names. We never see Nefertiti again. We think maybe she died, and then we discover she's Nefer Nefertiti, and that she's co-king. Cool, awesome, great for her, right? Like, she just made a huge accomplishment for a woman in ancient Egypt. But now Akhenaten's dead, and we never see Nefertiti ever again. However, what we see is the name Smenkhare. And Smenkhare, we know, is going to rule as king on behalf of likely Tut for a few years. And so it's been greatly debated by Egyptologists around the world. Who in the world is a Smenkhare? We've never heard them referenced before. We don't know the name. We've never, had this reference before. Until just recently, they've made a discovery, and they actually have evidence that suggests Smenkhare is actually Nefertiti. Nefertiti, I guess, if you will. So they believe that she changed her name a second time. So again, this would be a great moment to pause and add this to her list of names in your notes. So Nefertiti, again, is synonymous with Akhenaten, right? She's like the husband-wife duo. They're pictured everywhere together. So we believe that she changed her name from aten Nefertiti. Remember, it has that aten in there. They want to separate that. And she changed her name to Smenkhare to separate herself from her late husband, who is super hated by Egypt, and to kind of give herself a new image. So she's like reinventing herself, if you will. So the question is, did it work? So Smenkhare, let's talk about her. So I'm just going to reference her as Smenkhare / Nefertiti. So I'll we're all talking the same person here. Remember, we believe they're a living God on earth. And we also talked about how as soon as you become pharaoh, you have to have a queen. Well, this is an interesting situation, right? You need that power couple, if you will, the people that are able to make the decisions. They all have their special duties. Well, Smenkhare Nefertiti, she doesn't have a wife, nor does she have a husband, because then he would become king. So she does something that's very unique. Smenkhare actually marries her daughter, Anaxenamun. Now remember, Anaxenamun had also married her father, Akhenaten. She marries her daughter, Anaxenamun, basically to fulfill the figurehead role of being queen. I know this is a little bizarre and a little out there, but she's basically, think about how strategic this is from a mother's perspective. In ancient Egypt, women did not have power, right? They did not have the ability to gain wealth, or I shouldn't say that. They didn't have the ability to gain powerful positions easily. We've seen it's been done, but it's not an easy quest. So Smenkhare Nefertiti sees this opportunity where she can put one of her daughters in perhaps the second most powerful position of all of Egypt. She names her her queen. So now Smenkhare has just put Anaxenamun in a position where she's been queen twice now. She's helped run the country. She could be a perfect candidate down the road for pharaoh. So as a mother, this is a phenomenally strategic decision, trying to put her daughter in a prime position for rule. So, did her efforts work? Little is actually known about Nefertiti. Even though she had some groundbreaking role as co-king. I mean, she's the only female in Egyptian history that we see ever listed as co-king. It's actually, to be very honest, there's also very little known about Akhenaten. Here's why. Egypt so hated what Akhenaten did, how he was such an extremist, tried to turn them from polytheistic to monotheistic, that they actually chiseled away almost all records of them. That there is little to no evidence anywhere of their existence. If there is evidence, it's kind of been piecemealed, like half of it's chiseled away, and we can still kind of put some of it together. So the reason we know about Nefertiti, or we're actually just starting a lot of our research, and it's all, I shouldn't say all of it, but a large amount of it is triggered because of her famous discovery of the bust. The bust was discovered in the early 1900s, and shocker, there is some speculations that it's a fake. We could talk about that another day. But, she's, other than that, most of her story is actually removed from history. So after Smenkhkare's end of the reign, we don't know what happens to her. The reign ends. We never hear any more about her. Tut takes the throne, and Tut is, because he is so young, he is going to need someone who is experienced to help him rule, right? Kind of like the Hatshepsut situation with her younger brother. We need someone who's experienced in knowledge. So who's the perfect candidate to be queen? Well, his half-sister, Anaxinamun. She has now been queen for her dad, her mother, and now her half-brother. So we've kind of ended on a note for Nefertiti. So why don't we pause and take a second to take some notes on her. All right, so let's talk about what happens after Smenkhkare kind of disappears. So we see a young Tut on a throne. He does have an experienced sister, Anaxinamun, who is his queen, helping him. But for the first time, we kind of see the appearance of this advisor called Ai. So Ai is not a royal family member. He has no royal lineage, but he's very powerful and influential. So what we see is Ai is almost starting to almost too much influence Tut, that he is starting to push Tut in a direction of his own, interest, which is very dangerous because now the pharaoh is not really being pharaoh. We have an advisor somewhat being pharaoh. So we have no longer Nefertiti or Akhenaten in the picture, but we do have Anaxinamun ready to help Tut. Well, Tut's going to die at a very tragically young age. And him and Anaxinamun are going to have 2 children, but unfortunately they're going to die in infancy. So that means they die when they're a baby. So we have no heirs for the throne, no children whatsoever. So who's supposed to take the throne with no heirs? Well, think about it, right? Tut had no children, but his sister, his half-sister, if you will, has royal blood. She was great royal wife 3 times. And she had experience. She was the current sitting royal wife. She had connections with elite individuals. She makes almost the perfect candidate to be pharaoh. And we've seen in Egyptian history that women can be pharaoh, so why not her? So does Anaxinamun become pharaoh? She should, right? She absolutely earns that title. She's got the blood. She's got the history. She's got the experience. She's a perfect candidate. Does she get it? No. This brings about the end of the 18th dynasty. So this dynasty is going to end with Tut. And the throne is going to be stolen maybe, if you will, by Ai. Despite her ability and her right to rule, Anaxinamun will not become the next pharaoh. Instead, she becomes the great royal wife of Ai. So she has been married now 4 times. So why don't we pause? Let's take some notes on Tut, Anaxinamun, and Ai. All right, so we have to ask ourselves, why is Tut famous then? Because we just spent 2 whole days talking about his family, and a total of 5 minutes was about him. He accomplished nothing great. He made no significant change. His and Smenkhkare/Nefertiti's efforts to turn Egypt back around totally failed. Their family was basically removed from Egyptian dynasty. So why is he famous? He's famous because Howard Carter discovered his tomb. But we have to ask ourselves, of all the Valley of the Kings, why was Tut's tomb the only one that was not pillaged? Well, here's why. Egypt so hated Akhenaten that they chiseled away any evidence that he ever existed, him or his family, which is why it's been so hard to learn about Nefertiti, Akhenaten, Tut, all these things. So when Egypt was invaded in later years, they had stories about Ramses II and all these, even Thutmose I, all these great pharaohs. And so the people knew to look for those tombs because they knew they'd be filled with gold. Well, no one wrote about Tut because they had been erased from history. So no one found his tomb.